My name is Daniel. I am 52 years old. Most mornings I wake before the sun, not because I need to, but because my body no longer remembers what it means to rest. Habit became survival somewhere along the way. The house is always cold at that hour, the kind of quiet that belongs to men who rise early for reasons they stopped questioning years ago. I married Catherine when I was 36. She had a daughter, Hannah, 13 at the time. I told myself I was old enough to understand what I was stepping into. I told myself love could turn a fractured family into something whole. Back then, I still believed effort could rewrite history. Hannah's biological father, Mark, was a shadow with a last name. He existed only through fading photos and 2 phone calls a year, Christmas and her birthday, where his voice would drift through the receiver like static from another life. He never visited, never sent money, never stayed long enough to hear the silence on the other end. Catherine said he was complicated. That word did a lot of heavy lifting in those early years. So I became the one who showed up. I drove Hannah to school every morning, waited in the car line, surrounded by fathers half interested in their own children. I sat in hospital corridors while doctors explained what antibiotics she needed. I stayed late at work to afford her braces, her shoes, her summer programs, her future. Every decision, every bill, every sacrifice had her name attached to it. When she got older, I taught her how to parallel park, how to file her first tax form, how to change a tire. She didn't always thank me, but she listened, or at least pretended to. Sometimes she'd roll her eyes, that teenage dismissal, sharp and quick, but I'd take it as proof that she felt safe enough to be careless. I mistook indifference for comfort. That's the first mistake every stepfather makes. Money became the language of love in our house. I sold a car I'd been saving for, a 1972 Chevelle that I used to imagine restoring when life calmed down. It never did. The money went to her tuition. I gave up vacations, hobbies, little freedoms that once reminded me who I was before Catherine and Hannah filled the space where solitude used to live. Every month, I paid the mortgage, the utilities, the health insurance, the endless list of small necessities that turned into an invisible monument to devotion. I didn't build a home. I funded it. Catherine used to say I was patient, that I had the kind of heart that never complains. She said it like praise, but it was really permission to keep taking, to keep expecting that I'd shoulder the weight quietly. I thought that's what love was, endurance. Now I know endurance is just the word we use when we don't want to admit something's breaking. Hannah was bright, ambitious. She wanted to study design. I remember the day we toured her college in Florida, the humidity pressing against us, her eyes wide with excitement. She called the campus freedom. I smiled and said it was beautiful. I didn't tell her that the tuition statement in my pocket felt like a slow bleed I'd chosen willingly. I wanted her to have what I never did: options, security, the illusion that someone was always behind her, catching every fall. There were moments that felt almost real, moments that tricked me into believing I belonged. Like when she was 17 and couldn't sleep before exams. She sat on the kitchen counter at midnight eating cereal while I fixed the leaky faucet. She asked me if stress ever goes away when you're an adult. I laughed and said, "Only when you stop caring." She smiled, a small, tired smile, and said, "Then I guess I'll always be stressed." That was the closest thing to an asterisk Macy we ever had. 10 minutes under the yellow light of the kitchen. 2 people pretending the distance between them was normal. Every Father's Day, she'd post a photo of Mark online. Some old picture from before the divorce. Him holding her at a park, sunlight and filters hiding the truth. The captions were always short. Always my dad. No mention of me. Not once. Catherine would see me scrolling past it and say, "It's just social media. Don't take it personally." But how can you not, when the world she presents to everyone else has no trace of the man paying for it? I told myself love was measured in actions, not titles. That being called dad wasn't as important as being dependable. That consistency would build connection the way water carves canyons. Slow, invisible, inevitable. But consistency only matters when someone's looking. Otherwise, it's just silence with a paycheck attached. The years blurred. Hannah grew up. and I aged in the background like furniture that no one notices until it's gone. She graduated, got her degree, came home with new clothes, new opinions, new stories about friends who called their fathers my rock. I would listen, nodding, my mouth full of quiet understanding. She never looked at me when she said the word father. Maybe she didn't mean to exclude me. Maybe she did. At some point, the difference stopped matching. Catherine and I drifted into a pattern that didn't need words. She managed affection like a budget, careful, rationed, just enough to keep things functioning. Every argument ended the same way, with her telling me I took things too seriously. Maybe she was right. Maybe I wanted too much acknowledgement for doing the things a decent man is supposed to do. But even decent men need to feel seen once in a while. In our house, I was useful, not loved. Hannah's senior year of college nearly bankrupted me. Out-of-state tuition, apartment rent, utilities, books, emergencies. I worked extra shifts, sold my old tools, cashed out savings meant for retirement. Every invoice came with her name, every withdrawal with my initials. Catherine promised we'd rebuild later, that this was just a season. But seasons end. Debts don't. When Hannah came home for breaks, she'd talk about her professors, her projects, her friends' families. She'd mention how their parents visited, how their fathers gave advice about careers, how they took family trips together. I asked once if she wanted me to come visit her campus. She said, "It's fine, I'm busy." It was such a small sentence, but I carried it for months. That's the cruel thing about rejection in families like ours. It doesn't scream, it whispers. Still, I kept showing up. Birthdays, holidays, milestones. I bought the cake, the gifts, the tickets. Catherine organized, Hannah smiled for the photos, and I stood in the background holding the camera. Always the man, just outside the frame. When people asked how many children I had, I'd pause before saying one, then add, my stepdaughter too, as if love came with disclaimers. 16 years of quiet contribution. 16 years of believing that the weight I carried meant something. I thought the sacrifices would stack up into respect, that one day she'd look at me and see more than obligation. But respect is not cumulative. It resets every morning. Sometimes late at night, I'd walk past her empty room, the posters fading on the walls, the old trophies collecting dust. The air would still smell faintly of her perfume. I'd stand there, remembering the years that slipped through my hands like loose change, and wonder if she ever thought about who made it all possible. Probably not. Children rarely do. But Catherine should have. She was the witness to every compromise, every silence. And still, she said nothing. That was her betrayal. Not words, but absence of them. Now, as I sit here writing this, the house is quiet again. She's engaged, busy with plans, and I'm just a man in the background funding another chapter that won't include me. But before the story turns to its breaking point, before the final fracture, I wanted to be clear. I love that girl as if she were my own. I gave her everything I could, and maybe that's the problem. Maybe love built entirely on sacrifice isn't love at all. Maybe it's just surrender disguised as virtue. I used to think endurance was noble. Now I know it's just the slowest way to disappear. When Hannah got engaged to Josh, I told myself it was the reward at the end of all those years of endurance. The proof that I had done something right. I remember her showing us the ring, delicate, small, shining in the light like a promise that maybe, finally, she saw me. Catherine cried. I smiled. Inside, something trembled that I didn't want to name. Hope. At first, it was all excitement. Hannah called every evening with new ideas. Venues, flowers, menus, music. I listened, offered advice, tried to sound involved. But the deeper we went, the more it became clear that involvement didn't mean inclusion. I was the man who paid. The decisions were made elsewhere. Josh's parents are covering the rehearsal dinner, she said once, over the phone. So, could you handle the venue deposit? It's only fair if everyone contributes. I remember that word, contributes. It sounded so clean, so reasonable. What it really meant was fund it quietly. The banquet hall she chose sat in downtown Atlanta, a glass cathedral that cost more per night than the car I drove. The deposit alone drained what was left of my savings. I told Catherine maybe we should look for something smaller. She frowned, touched my arm, and said, It's her only wedding, Daniel. Let's not start this off with arguments. So I nodded and wrote the check. That's what I'd always done. Then came a dress, a boutique creation flown in from Los Angeles. Catherine went with her to fittings. I wasn't invited, but I saw the receipts. I paid for the gown, the shoes, the veil, the alterations. I sold my watch, the one I'd inherited from my father, to cover the balance. I told myself it was a good trade, sentiment for happiness. A father should give what he can. But I wasn't a father, was I? Just a man financing someone else's dream. There were meetings with florists, bakers, photographers, each one a blur of numbers. Every conversation ended the same way. Catherine saying she deserves the best. I started to wonder when deserve became synonymous with take. Still, I kept quiet. Not out of cowardice, but out of habit. Silence had been my language in this family for too long. The months bled together. Every evening, Catherine would show me swatches of fabric or mock-ups of invitation cards. Hannah's name was embossed in gold. Mine was nowhere. The invitations read, Catherine and Mark invite you to celebrate the marriage of their daughter. Mark, the ghost. The man who'd vanished before she learned to drive. His name on the paper, mine missing entirely. I asked Catherine about it. It's just tradition, she said softly, eyes already turning away. You know how these things are. I didn't answer. I just stared at that card until the letters blurred. Tradition, the word people use when they want to exclude you politely. A week later, I found out Mark had been invited to walk her down the aisle. Catherine said it gently, like she was breaking bad news to a child. It means a lot to her, she explained. It's symbolic. Symbolic of what? That blood outranks years? That presence can be faked once a decade and still count more than daily sacrifice? I wanted to ask. Instead, I nodded. That's what I always did. When Hannah came home to plan the seating chart, she barely spoke to me. She moved through the house like a guest, humming softly, her phone lighting up with messages from bridesmaids and vendors. I cooked dinner. She didn't eat with us. The air between us felt staged, rehearsed, like actors reading lines from different scripts. One night, while she was upstairs, Catherine said, "You should say something at the wedding. A short speech, maybe. It would mean a lot." I looked at her and asked, "To who?" She hesitated. "To me," she said quietly. "And maybe to her someday." So I agreed. I started writing a small speech. Nothing grand, just a few words about family, about choice, about love that isn't born but built. I thought maybe if she heard it from me, she'd understand. That love doesn't have to share blood to be real. I worked on that speech late at night, long after everyone else had gone to bed. Each sentence felt like stitching a wound that refused to close. Meanwhile, the bills kept coming. Every time my phone buzzed with a new notification, I flinched. Caterers, bands, lighting rentals, transportation, flowers, the honeymoon car. Each expense another reminder that I was financing my own invisibility. Still, I told myself this was the last mountain to climb. After this, there would be peace. After this, maybe she'd see me. The rehearsal dinner was the night before everything broke. It was held in a restaurant that smelled of expensive wine and polished wood. Everyone was there, her friends, his friends, Mark, his new wife. I sat at the far end of the table, smiling through the noise, pretending I belonged. When my turn came to speak, I stood up and gave Hannah a small box. Inside was a pendant, silver, simple, engraved with the date I met her. 16 years of care pressed into one quiet object. I told her it was just a reminder that families aren't always made by birth but by choice. She looked at it, then laughed. Laughed, sharp and careless. "Oh, Daniel," she said, "you're so sentimental." The room chuckled politely. Even Mark smiled. Something inside me folded in on itself. I felt the heat rise to my face, the blood draining from my hands. I sat down, pretending it didn't matter. Catherine avoided my eyes. That night, after everyone left, I sat alone at my desk. The pendant box still in my pocket, heavier than it had been hours ago. The laughter still echoing. That sound, small, dismissive, was the quietest betrayal I'd ever known. I opened my laptop. The screen's glow lit the room like a confession booth. For years, I'd been the silent benefactor, the invisible provider. My name was on every transfer, every invoice, every account. And if I was nobody, then my money should mean nothing too. I began to dismantle everything. The venue payment, canceled. The honeymoon car, revoked. The florist deposit, frozen. The joint account Catherine used for wedding expenses, closed. Each click felt like a breath I'd been holding for 16 years. It wasn't revenge. It was arithmetic. Balance at last. By midnight, the house was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Catherine came into the room, eyes wide, voice low. "What are you doing?" "I'm into my part," I said. "Daniel, it's tomorrow," she whispered, as if the wedding were a fragile thing that could be saved if she spoke softly enough. I looked at her. "Then let him save it. Let Mark pay for the symbol he's so proud to represent." She stared at me, disbelief, then fear, then something close to understanding. "You don't mean that." "I do," I said. "If I'm not a father, I won't play the financier." She tried to argue, but her words dissolved into tears. I didn't comfort her. Not this time. Compassion had become another form of servitude. When dawn came, I was already awake, coffee cooling beside me. My phone buzzed with missed calls. Hannah, the planner, Catherine. I didn't answer. I just stared at the sunlight creeping across the floor, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Calm. By noon, the messages changed from confusion to panic. By evening, the caterer had withdrawn, the venue was locked, and the whispers began. Guests posting online, speculating. The perfect wedding dissolving in real time. I thought I would feel guilt. I didn't. I felt relief. A strange, light silence, like the air after a storm. The house stayed quiet for 3 days. Catherine moved through it like a ghost, phone in hand, her voice brittle with apologies. I didn't stop her. I had stopped everything else. When Hannah finally called, her voice was sharp, trembling with rage. "How could you do this?" she shouted. "How could I not?" I asked. "You ruined everything." "No," I said softly. "I just stopped paying for the illusion." She hung up. The line went dead. I sat there for a long time afterward, staring at the pendant in my palm, the one she'd laughed at. The engraving caught the light. 16 years. I thought of all the mornings, the drives, the bills, the silent pride. And then I realized the truth that had been hiding in plain sight all along. I hadn't raised a daughter. I'd raised an expectation. The morning after I canceled everything, the house felt like the aftermath of a funeral. The kind where no one brings flowers, just silence. Catherine sat in the kitchen wearing the same clothes as yesterday, her eyes swollen, her phone lighting up with messages she didn't have the strength to answer. I poured her a cup of coffee. She didn't touch it. "Daniel," she said finally, "you've gone too far." "Have I?" I asked. "Or did I just stop pretending?" She rubbed her temples, shaking her head. "She's devastated. The guests are calling. Mark's furious. You humiliated her." "She humiliated me first," I said, my voice quiet, even. "I just did it privately. She chose to do it in front of everyone." "You're the adult," Catherine said, her tone hardening. "You're supposed to be better than that." I laughed, a hollow sound like something breaking inside my chest. "Better? You mean quieter?" She didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. The air between us was too thick with all the words we'd never said when they could still have mattered. By noon, the news had spread through her side of the family. The texts started coming, from cousins, friends, even people I barely knew. "How could you ruin her big day? She looked up to you. Money isn't everything." Each message another reminder that everyone loves a villain when it keeps them from looking too closely at the truth. I didn't reply to any of them. Silence was the only thing left that still belonged to me. That evening, Hannah came home. I heard the door slam before I saw her. Her footsteps hit the hallway like hammers. She found me in the living room, sitting under the dim light with the pendant in my hand. "What the hell did you do?" she demanded. I looked up at her, the same face I'd seen grow from a child's innocence into a woman's defiance. "I did what you asked," I said. "I didn't ask for this." Her voice cracked, raw and furious. "You embarrassed me. You ruined my wedding." I stood slowly. "No, Hannah, I just stopped paying for it. You ruined the rest yourself." She glared at me, shaking her head. "You're sick. You think money makes you important." "No," I said softly. I think 16 years of raising you should have meant something. She opened her mouth to reply, then hesitated, searching for a wee asterisk P asterisk inch sharper than truth. You're not my father, she said finally, each word deliberate, clean, final. I nodded once. You're right. Catherine gasped behind her, but I didn't look. My eyes stayed on Hannah. You said what you always meant. I just needed to hear it clearly. Do you even understand what you've done? She said, her voice trembling now. People are calling me selfish, ungrateful. Josh's family. Then maybe they see something I refuse to. She went quiet. For the first time, she looked uncertain. I could almost see the cracks beneath her anger, the faint outline of a girl who used to ask me for help tying her shoes. But pity is a dangerous indulgence. I couldn't afford it anymore. Mark will fix it, she said, forcing confidence back into her tone. He'll help. Good, I said. Then you'll finally have the father you always wanted. Her jaw tightened. You're unbelievable. No, I said. I'm done being invisible. She stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. The echo lingered like applause in an empty theater. Catherine didn't speak for hours. When she finally did, her voice was thin and shaking. She'll never forgive you. She never thanked me, I said. We're even. That night, I lay awake, listening to the quiet hum of the house. It was a sound I'd grown used to, the breath of something I'd built but never truly owned. I realized then that forgiveness wasn't what I wanted. Recognition was. Just once, I wanted someone in this house to say, you mattered. Instead, what I got was silence, the kind that answers everything. The next morning, Mark called. His number flashed across my phone like an accusation. I almost didn't answer. Curiosity won. Daniel, he said, voice thick with irritation. What the hell's going on? I'm sure you've heard, I said. The wedding's off. Yeah, I heard, he snapped. You think that's fair? Doing that to your own daughter? She's not my daughter, I said quietly. You made that clear a long time ago. He laughed, a short, mocking sound. You're really something, man. 16 years pretending to be her dad, and now you walk away because your feelings got hurt. I walked away, I said, because I finally realized I was never in the room to begin with. You're pathetic, he said. You think this makes you strong? No, I replied. It makes me honest. He hung up without another word. I stared at the silent phone for a long time before setting it down. There was no anger left, only the steady ache of recognition. Mark wasn't my enemy. He was my reflection, the man Hannah had always wanted me not to be, and yet the one she always forgave. Later that week, I went back to the restaurant where the rehearsal dinner had been held. I sat alone at the bar, ordered a glass of bourbon, and looked around at the empty tables. The same lights, the same music, but everything different now. I thought about the pendant, still in my pocket, and wondered if I should throw it away. But I didn't. Some reminders are meant to stay, not as grief, but as proof. The bartender asked if I was waiting for someone. I told him no. That was the truest thing I'd said in months. When I drove home, the streets were wet from rain. The city lights bled across the windshield, blurring like memory. I pulled into the driveway and sat there, engine idling, watching the faint glow from the kitchen window. Catherine was inside, pacing. I could see her shadow moving against the wall, a woman trapped between loyalty and guilt. I didn't go in. I just turned off the car and sat in the darkness, letting the quiet settle. By morning, the silence had become unbearable. Catherine tried one last time. We can fix this, she said. If you just apologize. For what? I asked. For finally telling the truth? For breaking her heart, she whispered. I looked at her, really looked. No, Catherine. I didn't break her heart. I stopped renting space in it. Her eyes filled with tears. You'll regret this, Daniel. I already regret everything that came before it. She turned away, and that was the last real conversation we ever had. Days passed. The wedding date came and went. Guests posted photos of themselves dressed up at other events that weekend, pretending they'd never RSVP'd to ours. The flowers wilted in storage. The hall refunded half the deposit. The rest was gone. So were they, Catherine and Hannah, both moving through their own versions of grief, each rewriting the story to make me the villain. I didn't fight it. Every family needs a scapegoat. It gives them unity. A week later, I received a letter in the mail. No return address, but I knew the handwriting. Hannah's. It wasn't an apology. It never is. It was a ledger of blame, neat and articulate. She wrote that I'd betrayed her, that I'd ruined her happiness, that I'd proven every cruel thing she ever suspected about me. At the bottom, one line stood alone. I hope you can live with what you've done. I read it twice, then a third time, and all I could think was, I already have been. That evening, I took the pendant out to the backyard. The sky was bruised with dusk. I dug a small hole near the fence, dropped the pendant in, and covered it with earth. I didn't say a prayer. I just stood there, watching the soil settle, feeling lighter and emptier all at once. It wasn't an act of anger. It was burial, not of her, but of the version of me that kept mistaking sacrifice for love. When I went back inside, the house felt different. Hollow but honest. There's a strange comfort in knowing the truth, even when it leaves you alone. That night, I poured myself a drink and sat in the dark, listening to the rain against the windows. I thought about everything I'd built, the years, the money, the quiet faith that one day it would mean something. It never did. And yet, as the rain softened, I realized I didn't need it to anymore. Because sometimes breaking isn't the end of a man. It's the first time he finally hears the sound of his own freedom. The wedding never happened. It dissolved the way frost does when the sun finally rises, silently, as if it were never there. The guests returned to their cities with suit bags and unanswered questions. They whispered in rental cars, in hotel lobbies, in group chats lit like small bonfires of gossip. A few sent messages to Catherine. We're praying for you, as if prayer could reconcile math. 16 years of credit on my side, one laughing dismissal on hers. No one wrote to me. Villains don't get condolences. Mark disappeared again, perfectly on schedule. He answered none of the calls, replied to none of the texts, and took no responsibility. The man who was supposed to fix it turned into vapor, leaving the shape of a father without the burden of being one. I didn't gloat. I just watched the absence settle like dust across every surface I had paid to keep clean. Hannah's anger hardened into doctrine. She spoke to her mother in the clipped sentences of bureaucracy, then stopped speaking to her at all. For a week, the house rang with two kinds of silence, the kind that begs for forgiveness and the kind that refuses to be asked. I occupied the third silence, the one that owns itself. I woke at the same hour, brewed the same bitterness, went to work, came home, and said very little. Peace is not the same thing as quiet, but sometimes quiet is the best a man can buy with what remains of his soul. Her letter arrived again in my head, even when it was no longer in my hands. I had folded it once, twice, then tucked it in a drawer like a knife I didn't want to throw away in case I needed to remember its edge. You ruined everything. You proved what you are. She chose accusation over memory. Not a single sentence about the years. Not a single sentence about the rides, the bills, the nights in hospital chairs, the way I swapped my dreams for her deadlines. Just a verdict, unappealable. You are not my father. The day after I buried the pendant by the fence, I unlocked a different drawer and carried out a life I'd kept hidden even from myself. The spreadsheets. 16 years of meticulous obedience. Tuition, rent, braces, book fees, therapy copays, car insurance, plane tickets, broken screens, surprise birthdays, winter coats, spring formals, even the little things that feel too small to remember until they fill a room with their totals. I stared at those columns until numbers stopped being numbers and turned into weather, what a storm looks like from inside a man. Then I began to move the money somewhere she would never think to look for it, away. First, I closed the account Catherine used as a corridor between my labor and their comfort. I kept the mortgage and the utilities. Structures don't deserve to collapse because people do. Then I liquidated what was meant to forgive my old age for happening. The retirement fund. The vacation jar that had somehow gathered a handful of coins and a promise. The small portfolio I'd built with a discipline no one ever applauded because applause costs nothing and discipline costs every day. I wrote a single large check to a place that feeds orphans and keeps their shelters warm in winter. I did not tell Catherine. I did not tell Hannah. I did not ask for a plaque or a brick with my name on it. Money could be a wee asterisk P asterisk N, yes, but sometimes it could be a clean goodbye. The man at the foundation shook my hand and thanked me as if I had returned something of his, not mine. On the way out, I passed a bulletin board crowded with photographs. Kids with awkward haircuts and brave clothes, holding paper certificates like shields. They were smiling in the way Hannah smiled when she was 8 and still believed the future loved her. My throat closed. I stood there a long time, remembering a girl who asked me to lift her up to reach the top shelf of the grocery store. She called me Daniel then, too, but her hand trusted my shoulder more than any word could. Back home, the house renamed itself. It stopped being a project and became a place. The rooms were suddenly honest. They didn't pretend to be stages anymore. I began to hear ordinary sounds again. The refrigerator's small labor, the tick of the living room clock, the wind shouldering the windows at night. I took a box from the garage and filled it with what I no longer owed to memory. Wedding mock-ups, ribbon samples, a swatch of expensive white fabric I had been instructed to keep perfectly clean. I placed the box in the attic, not from malice, but because history needs altitude to lose its power. Catherine tried to negotiate against gravity. For a week, she approached me with offers crafted from the thin materials of regret. "She's young," she said. "Please remember that." Then, softer, "I didn't defend you enough." There it was, the admission that came too late to repair anything but her conscience. I didn't punish her. I simply stopped lending her the architecture of my patience. We shared a table and ate in the company of our failed design. Some nights, she cried facing the window, as if the dark could witness what she was not brave enough to name in daylight. I did the dishes. I replaced a burned-out bulb. I took the trash to the curb. A marriage can survive on chores long after it chokes on love. Eventually, Hannah asked to meet. Not to reconcile, she wrote, but to clarify. We sat in a coffee shop with good light and bad mercy. She spoke first, all clip precision. "You force me to see who you really are," she said. Control in a suit. I looked at the door behind her, a rectangle of afternoon sending dust into flight. I said, "If money is control, you lived under a dictatorship you praised until the parade was canceled." She flinched, then straightened. "Josh thinks you're toxic." I nodded. Josh, who didn't call me once to ask why the check stopped. She blinked like someone seeing rain for the first time and calling it a malfunction. We parted without shaking hands. After that, absence grew like a plant that thrives on neglect. Weeks passed without her name crossing our threshold. The little pile of unopened mail on the hall table stopped pretending to be urgent. One evening, I noticed that the wall of family photos leaned slightly left, as if the house itself were tired of holding the pose. I removed the frames carefully and stacked them face down. The blank wall did not accuse me. It only breathed. Freedom arrived as a series of small permissions. I bought a used truck not made of guilt. I put the seat back and drove to the river where Atlanta pretends not to be a city. I stood on the bank and watched water argue with rock and wind by being patient. I came home and cooked for two, sometimes for one, and the food tasted like food again, not like a bribe to keep the peace alive one more night. I slept, really slept. The dream I kept having, the one where I was running while counting, stopped visiting. In the mornings, I found that my hands didn't shake when I held a cup. It's strange what a man regains when he stops pawning himself. Catherine and I entered the phase where conversation becomes archaeology. We used brushes instead of shovels. We uncovered layers. Her fear of being alone, my fear of being needed only for what I made. We did not assign blame. Blame had already found its favorite chair. We asked whether a house can be repurposed without first being emptied. We did not say the word divorce. We said space and time and maybe. The words behaved like adults, polite, imprecise, exhausted. Sometimes I thought about Hannah on a morning years from now, opening a drawer and finding the pendant I hid from myself by the fence, because time could be a kind thief, digging with roots where hands dare not. I imagined her tracing the engraving with a thumb she learned to steady in labs and studios I paid for. I did not hope for sorrow. I hoped for comprehension. That is the mercy I can still afford. Not reconciliation, but context. A colleague asked if I missed her. I said I missed the version of myself that believed effort guarantees belonging. He nodded like a man who remembers his own mistakes by their invoices. On Sundays, I started volunteering at the foundation. Not heroics, just shelves and inventory, the quiet economy of usefulness. I stacked cans with a steadiness that felt like penance without the priest. A boy helped me lift a box that was almost too heavy for him. "Thanks, sir," he said. A small sentence, perfectly placed. Respect, distilled to its purest form. Acknowledgement plus weight shared. I don't romanticize any of this. Liberation is not joy. It is air. It is the ability to breathe without borrowing lungs you'll be charged for later. Some nights, I still stand at the kitchen sink and watch the neighborhood go dark one window at a time, and I feel the loneliness of a man who chose a clean wound over a dirty infection. I'm learning to let the ache be proof that I didn't go numb to survive. Pain that leaves the heart intact is a mercy. What remains? A house that pays me back with shelter. A ledger closed with finality instead of interest. A bank account disciplined by absence instead of demands. A woman who might yet decide whether silence is loyalty or fear. A girl who will someday become a woman and encounter the price of her own pronouncements. And a question that walks beside me like a twin I can't outrun. If a man refuses to be used, and the family he funded calls it cruelty, is the cruelty his or theirs? Was I wrong to stop paying for love that would never learn my name? Would you have endured what I ended?